Okay, gang, here we go. We are in the home stretch here. We've only got 4 centuries left. This is one of them. The 15th century would be from 1400 to 1499. And hopefully I'm not going too fast, but there's a lot more material. Every century there's more and more and more stuff. And I'm trying to keep moving quickly so you're not sitting there for like half your life watching YouTube. As always, look at the slides, look at the sources at the very end. I will tell you, the more we get into modern era stuff, the more I am actually using the Catholic Encyclopedia instead of pretty much anything else. For number one, because it's simple, but we're going to find more and more and more hostility to the Catholic Church in secular sources, okay, as we go forward. And it's just very difficult and time consuming to sit there and sort out the truth in a secular source, where I can go to the Catholic Encyclopedia and just get what I need without having to go through hours and hours of, and the church was the worst. Okay, well, yeah, maybe, but can we just, the facts, please? And that tends to be something that's easier to get out of the Catholic Encyclopedia articles. So, all right, so moving on. Okay, now this is a guy that whose career began last century, and it didn't fit well there, so I didn't mention him yet. But remember, this is Western civilization that we're studying. Sometimes a character doesn't really come into our radar for a while, even though he's been doing things, and that's what's happened here. This guy's name is Timur, we almost always call him Tamerlane. Okay, and he was a guy from Asia, Mongol type, okay? And he has been conquering and pillaging and conquering in the east for quite a while. So in 1401, he conquers Damascus and Baghdad. So he is all the way up against the Mediterranean Sea, which is the far, far left body of water on this map. Just a little bit of it there. And he also conquers Angora. All right. He is trying to recreate what used to be sort of the Persian Empire. That's what's marked in green here. And he's had different kinds of alliances while doing that. He's worked with Muslims, he's worked with Christians, he's worked with really whoever was handy. Okay, well, he is Muslim, and now he's concerned. Oh, I allied myself with Christians to defeat a Muslim army, and now I've got the land I want. I need to make sure that the Christians know who's boss. So he sends envoys to the Christian knights who rule the city of Smyrna and says, okay, you have to convert or pay tribute. And the knights tell him to step off, and so he attacks the city of Smyrna and kills everyone in it, including the women of the children. And he has the heads of the defeated piled into a pyramid. So, lovely, lovely guy, great neighbor. That's Tamerlane. And he'll be around for a few more years before he dies and somebody else starts ruling this Asia Minor area. So in 1406, Ptolemy, the ancient Greek scientist, mathematician, is kind of rediscovered in Europe. He has a geography and maps to go with it. And in Ptolemy's design, the Earth is the center of the universe. We should remember this from our 2nd century. And all heavenly bodies revolve around the Earth in spheres. Okay? And this is kind of cool. This is actually a contemporary map for our century that we're studying now. This is a 15th century Ptolemaic map of Europe. Okay, now, again, we've heard of him. We remember Ptolemy. We talked about the spheres. I drew it on the board in class. It was very sad, but I did it. All this time, his works have kind of been lost. People in Egypt, parts of the East, have access to it, but in the European West, nobody's really thought about Ptolemy since the fall of Rome. Okay, so what is going on with this map? It looks super, super weird. So the most recognizable thing is just to the left of the crease, which is where the map is folded. Okay, there's a long, tall, skinny piece of land of water and a long, long river just to the left of it. That long, long river is the Nile, okay, and the tall, skinny sea is the Red Sea. So that piece of land is Saudi Arabia. That's the Arabian Peninsula. Okay, so the long, long river, the Nile, that is going, it flows north and empties into, that's the Mediterranean Sea. At the very, very far left of this map, you see Spain. You can kind of see the boot of Italy. You can see the island of England at the top, above Europe. Okay, and you can see the edge of the world. Okay, did Ptolemy believe the earth was flat? Look at this map and tell me, did Ptolemy believe the earth was flat? No, he did not. Look at the arc of the map. If you were to roll this map up, you'd have a cone, right? Interesting. I think that's pretty cool. I like maps. You may have heard. Okay, so in 1408 in Great Britain, a man named John Wycliffe is dead, but has become famous because he had pushed all his life for an English language Bible, and it finally gets published in 1408. Okay, the vernacular scripture, right? Bible in the language of the people was a big thing for him, and he had begun a translation. It finally gets published. So who is John Wycliffe? Real quick, we need to know about him because he is a precursor to Martin Luther. So he's a philosopher, theologian, translator, reformer. He's a priest. He's a Catholic priest. And he became an influential dissident, okay, which is not quite a heretic, but getting right up there to the edge, during the 14th century. So what kinds of things did he complain about? Legitimate things like, priests and bishops have an awful lot of money. Why are we buying and selling religious articles? All the areas of financial corruption that, by the way, we're clear on this is a bad thing, right? All those things, he preached against that all the time. Okay. He was into the Bible thing. Everybody should be able to read the Bible themselves. Let's translate it into their language, so on and so forth. Okay. That became, later in his life, and especially amongst his followers, a theology that preached iconoclasm, right? No images, no artwork, nothing. No veneration of the saints, no sacraments, no requiem masses, no monasticism, okay? No papacy as a source of authority. Okay, they went from too much fancy is bad, okay, to any worldly expression of religion is bad. If it's made out of stuff and you're using it for religion, it's a bad thing. Okay, so they went way on. Sometimes you'll hear his followers referred to as lollards. That wasn't that nice. They were like being made fun of. But anyway, Wycliffe is sometimes called the last scholastic. Again, he's a precursor to Luther. He did write in Latin. He was never excommunicated or declared a heretic. Okay, not everything that I just listed is something that he personally taught. That's something that became popular amongst his followers. So that's Wycliffe or Wycliffe. Okay, so we still have the two pope problem. In 1409, there's a council, a church council at Pisa, and they're going to tell these two popes, please step down, and we're going to elect a new one. So you have Gregory the 12th in Rome and anti-pope Benedict the 8th in Avignon. They both say forget it. They will not. So the council at Pisa is inconclusive. I've been to the Tower of Pisa, and this is exactly true. There's just like all these people doing the weirdest things, taking their picture with it. Okay, in Northern Europe, We're having some wars, and we're talking about this because this picture of the castle is just, I can't not put this in here. So you have Germanic armies called the Teutonic Knights. They're trying to gain control of Poland, and they are fighting against Poles, Lithuanians, and Ruthenians. Okay, so this map is a little tough because it's a map for the time period, and it's an area of Europe we don't know very well. But so that's the blue, the water is the Baltic Sea, and the left part of the map that's kind of yellow, that would be part of modern Germany. And what's in the center of the map is Poland. The part that's green on the far right would be modern Russia. Okay, gives you kind of an idea of where we are, northern central Europe. Okay, the Teutonic Knights lose. Okay, there's a decline in their power. Eastern Europe does not become basically a colony of Germany. And again, I just kind of want to show you the castle because it's cool. There you go. That's it. Okay, now in 1413, followers of Wycliffe, who again is dead, he's been dead for 30 years, come out and say, all right, we like our Bible, we got our Bible in English, this is the only guide to faith. Okay, we should not have any other rules or thoughts or doctrines of any kind. If it's not in the Bible, we don't like it. Okay, so if you look at the map, the green areas are kind of where people had heard of Wycliffe during his life. Okay, and by this time in the 15th century, it's spread to all these red places as well. Okay, so they oppose war, which is usually religious war, no transubstantiation, no confession, no images, all the things that I listed. And they organize a political march, and they march to London. Okay, Henry V, who is a Catholic, is concerned at the social disorder and suppresses the movement. He said, no, you can't have your religion because you're being crazy. So this is called the Old Castle Revolt because the leader of this group that goes to London and is shouting in the streets is named John Oldcastle. Okay, so if you were just reading F. Smitha, that whole story would have been summarized as English king suppresses religious freedom movement. That's all it would have said. Okay, well, there's a little more to it, right? Speaking of heretics, this is a big one. In 1415, this guy, Jan Hus, who is a Czech priest, they're all Catholic priests, right? There's nothing else to be right now, who had been the dean of philosophy at the University of Prague, travels to the Council of Constance, which is going on, to propose reforms for the church. Okay? And he's ends up being tried for heresy and burns at the stake. Okay, so what it's like, this is like it's the escalated quickly meme in real life. So this sparks some pretty crazy wars in Central Europe, in the area that we now call Czech Republic and parts of Germany. At that time, it was called Bohemia, especially the dark green at the bottom. Okay, and these are wars between Catholics, including the Holy Roman Emperor, and these heretics and rebels in Bohemia. Okay, as the story is very complicated, like all the others we've dealt with, the triggering events, okay, the thing that led him to be a problem was really political, not theological. However, unlike Wycliffe, who was less firm in his teachings, Wycliffe was like, this might be a problem. Huss has a clearly defined theological beef. He is a heretic. Okay. Wycliffe didn't believe in salvation quite the right way. He didn't understand how free will could work. He figured people were probably predestined. They were either going to go to heaven or go to hell. Okay, that's not that different from what St. Augustine taught. Okay, Huss, on the other hand, started the same as most other Protestant reformers. He's very critical of corruption in the clergy. And he fixated on the centuries-long practice that at Mass, the priest consecrated bread and he consecrated wine, but the lay people only received the sacred host, okay? Which, for him, he said that was the clergy withholding something that the laity deserved, okay? And he point blank taught that if you didn't receive both species at communion, both the host and the wine, both the body and the blood, if you didn't get both, then you couldn't be saved. Both species were required for salvation. Okay, that is an old heresy. Okay, if you guys remember the Nestorians from like the very first week we did this, okay, Nestorianism said the same thing. Only Christ's body is in the bread. Only Christ's blood is in the wine. You need both. You're not going to heaven. Okay. So, this is the difference between Wycliffe, who was confused but squishy, and Huss, who was out there preaching an already clearly defined, already clearly condemned theological heresy. Okay. The correct teaching is the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ is contained completely and totally in both the bread and the wine, both the body and the blood. It's all there. You only need one. Okay? And on top of that, he's got his legitimate complaints about corruption. Okay, so he's burned at the stake for doing what? For refusing to recant his beliefs that make him an historian, right? You are not going to find any source on the internet that will tell you the church's side of this story because going to do a new slide because there's a lot here. This is a map of the wars that happened after he's killed. So basically, Jan Hus had just terrible timing. Okay, the Council of Constance met in 1415 for definitely not at all the purpose of handling a slightly crazy Czech priest who was way out in the weeds on his Eucharistic theology. Okay, they were meeting to handle the now we've got 3 popes problem that they had caused at the Council of Pisa. Okay, we had 2 popes. They were like, okay, well, we're going to elect a 3rd one. We're going to elect a new one. You guys are going to go away. And they didn't leave. So now we got 3. So the bishops and cardinals, along with a large number of princes, kings, the emperor, met at Constance. And they were super unfriendly to anybody who was not on board with their agenda of unscrewing the mess with the church hierarchy and getting us back to one pope as soon as possible. Okay, so they did succeed in that. They deposed or accepted the willing resignation of all 3 problem popes, and they elected Martin V. So the Council of Constance in 1415 ends the Western Schism. Important, right? That's what they were there for. Unfortunately, this happens to be the very important meeting that Jan Hus shows up at, and they execute him for not recanting his problematic theology. Okay, so the controversy of this, the idea that Jan Hus was treated unjustly, and so thus, by extension, the Catholic Church is terrible. Okay, it all centers on a couple cardinals and the emperor having supposedly made a secret deal that Hus would be given safe passage. Okay, so putting that another way, Hus was going to come and defend himself and basically walk into the lion's den when he could have just stayed in hiding, stayed in exile. And the secular authority promises they're going to protect him, even though, you know, he's submitting himself to an ecclesiastical court. All right, so why would the emperor do that? Because getting a theological dissident, getting a heretic with followers to agree with the church was a very important part of keeping the peace in the empire itself. Okay, we're about to see the emperor proved right? If the Hussite wars that are about to start are proof of that. So anyway, the emperor basically said, hey, come apologize, I'll make sure they don't kill you. Then Huss shows up, didn't do the apology part, and the rest is history. He refused to recant the problems with his theology. Okay, that's the problem. End of story. That's it. And that's what happened to Jan Hus. He does seem to have been a very devout, sincere, really thought he was right guy, but still a heretic. And we've reached the age of discovery. My favorite. Congratulations. Welcome. Come in. Take a seat. Let's talk about boats. Actually, we're really not going to do that very much. It's too bad. In 1419, the Portuguese have reached a new era, a new phase in their exploration. They are using what are called lateen-rigged ships. That's a triangle-shaped sail. They and they can tack into the wind, which if you understand sailing, I don't need to say more. If you don't understand sailing, basically you don't have to have the wind directly behind you in order to take advantage of it. So this is great. So they're exploring the waters all off the coast of northern Africa. They claim, for example, the island of Madeira, and are getting better and better and better at building different types of ships for different types of jobs. Okay. And at the helm of this Portuguese enterprise is Dom Henrique, the fourth son of the King of Portugal. Okay, and as we all know, fourth sons don't tend to end up being much of anything, right? Except occasionally assassinated when one of their older brothers has their own son. It's like, oh no. So anyway, guy that probably we would never have heard of if he had not been a totally driven, dedicated, hardworking ideologue, really, who would not stop for 5 seconds in his quest to put Portugal on the map, which he did by finding every place he possibly could and putting that on the map. So, you may know him as Henry the Navigator, which is a little misleading. It's honestly disappointing. Henry the Navigator never went anywhere, okay? He didn't do a lot of this exploring his own personal self, but he paid for it all. He financed and directed and authorized an immense amount of ocean-going discovery. He is the one that sent people to find the thing, okay, and made sure that they were paid for what they were doing and their discoveries were accurately charted when they got back, things like that. Very important fellow, Dom Henrique. Meanwhile, the 100 Years' War is still going on. Not been 100 years yet, so sorry. In May, Joan of Arc defeats the English at Orleans. Now, I am just ignoring the whole story of Joan of Arc because you know it. In August, she enters Paris in triumph. This map shows campaigns she participated in. Okay. Just to tie us to last century, there was King John the Good who died. We talked about he was captured by the English. He was in prison for a while. They let him out. He died. Joan is helping out his son, Charles. Okay. English won round 1. We're in like round 2 and 3, etc., 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 etc. In 1431, some Englishmen decide Joan of Arc is a witch, and they're able to capture her. They turn her over to an ecclesiastical court, okay, one of the courts of the Inquisition. And in the French town of Rennes, which was at that point controlled by the English, Joan is burned at the stake. I'm trying to find Rennes really quickly. Yeah, it's on the it's at the left. See, there's the word Normandy, and Rouen is kind of closer to the coast. Okay, so in this pre-industrial age, the biggest business there is in some ways, is banking. And in the Tuscan city of Florence, a banking family, the Medici, begins to dominate the city politically as well as commercially. Okay. This image is not of Florence. This is a city called Buda, which is under Florence's control. And it's a tiny little town, and it becomes wealthy and powerful because of its relationship with Florence. But it was good artwork, so I chose it. All right. Trying to move quickly here. You will be shocked to hear I'm going to summarize something that is super important and way more complicated than we can get into now. Surprise! Okay. The Council of Florence was called in 1431. Okay, we just did Council of Constance. This is Florence. Council of Florence. Called in 1431, and the purpose was to work out a unification of the Byzantine or Eastern Church and the Roman Catholic Church. At a rough start, it actually had been called for a town called Basel, but a plague made the move. They went to Ferrara, and another plague made them move, so they went to Florence. So it takes multiple years for it to even get started. All along the way, as this council is convened but never begins, more and more groups get added to the invitation list. Okay, and the political reasons for the council get more and more obvious. Okay, basically, the Byzantine Emperor is in panic mode. Okay, you remember the Turks from last century who were practicing the siege warfare? Well, they're super good at it now, and they're on their way to Constantinople. It's everybody knows. The emperor is exhausted. He does not have any military strength left. Certainly not enough to withstand the very talented Turks. He needs the West. So the driving force behind this church council is the Byzantine emperor. The Pope says, "Okay, cool. We'll put the church's halves back together. I'm up for that, right?" So 8 years. In 1439, the Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox Church leaders agree to reunify the branches of Christianity. Okay, the Russian Orthodox leaders do not agree. They separate from the other Orthodox churches and remain independent of the Vatican. They really were never part of the other Eastern churches, but they're on the list. So anyway, but that's not the end of the story. Also on the didn't agree list are the monks of the Eastern Church, many of the local bishops, smaller bishops who weren't at the council, and a lot of lay people, like most of the lay people. The emperor, the pope, the western bishops, the patriarch, all the high-level leaders who had actually met at this council kind of glossed over some very real and very significant theological differences. Okay, in their effort to get a political alliance before the Turks show up and smush Constantinople, they ignore this lack of theological agreement. Okay, so they didn't really create a genuine reunification. So again, this is the Council of Florence. And this is the emperor on his way to the council. That's what the painting is. Okay, instead you get your key fact for this century. Okay, the fall of Constantinople, the final permanent destruction of the Roman Empire in the East. Okay, so in 1453, fall of Constantinople. Constantinople has been declining economically, in population. It's actually not as big as it used to be. Military strength. The Western leaders who were in on the Council of Florence and agreed to all this don't seem super interested in actually doing anything to help the East once the council is over. They don't show up with enough help. They don't show up on time. They basically don't show up at all. And again, the political motives for the council on the Byzantine emperor's side, pretty obvious. It was not a very genuine alliance of Christians to defeat the Turks, put it that way. So the council is a failure in that sense. Using European artillery and experts, okay, they're paying European artillery experts. The Ottoman Turks break through Constantinople's walls. The Muslim force captures the city, and that is the end of Constantinople as the center of Eastern Orthodox Christianity and the heart of the remains of the Roman Empire. Okay, it's a little dramatic sounding, but it's true. It's bad. The sack of Constantinople, it's a big deal. Okay, I put a link here on the slide if you want to take an extra 10 minutes. This is a very interesting video. I've referenced the Hagia Sophia, the great cathedral in Constantinople, a couple times in other centuries. I keep saying, when we get to the Hagia Sophia. Okay, well, then is now. And I encourage you to watch that if you can. It does have the history of the building itself, including the history of the city around it. Explains the architecture. Lots of cool video of the inside. Okay, and the story of the fall of the city a little bit and kind of what happens after. For some reason, articles and videos that are like simulations of chant in Hagia Sophia, because you're not allowed to sing or perform or make loud noises in there now. So simulations of what chant would have sounded like in Hagia Sophia are really trending right now. So if you were to research this building, or Constantinople, you're probably going to come up with some of that. So it's fine. Just letting you know. Okay, we got to move. In 1453, the French capture Bordeaux. the last place that the English hold on the continent, except for the port of Calais itself. The last battle of the war with, stabbing and bleeding and whatnot, was fought at a place called Castillon. So the 100 Years' War is over, but it ends without a formal treaty. There's no thing where you're like, oh, yep, this is the day it ended. Okay, no renouncing of rights to the French thrown by the English king, even. Okay, the war is just over. Both countries have their internal national bonds strengthened, in particular with regard to language. Okay, French had been used as the language of business and diplomacy for the upper classes in England, and that's over. A bunch of things have changed. However, it's over. The English people are not super happy at losing. They're not happy with the cost of the war, at the losses of continental land, which resulted. But as soon as the war is over, everybody's trade is able to revive a little, and the economic depression that's been going on comes to an end. So there are good things that come out of it. In 1455, in a German town called Mainz, Johannes Gutenberg uses metal type in a screw type printing press, like pictured here, to print a Bible. Okay, it's called the 42-line Bible. His original idea came from watching screw presses that were used in agriculture, so like for crushing grapes and things like that. He was the first European to use typesetting. He's been doing it for, at this point, about 10 years. Before he did the Bible, it's been about 10 years since he first started messing with this. And printing will increase dramatically over a short time. We've talked about the Chinese. The Chinese have been doing printing and printing presses and things like that for a long time. He's the first European to do it. And that's a very important moment. Okay? Pope Nicholas V, in 1455, sort of reopens the renewed Vatican Library. Okay? Nicholas is a humanist. We'll talk about humanism in a bit. He's into literature and art and music, and he is spending the Vatican wealth on beautiful things like this. Okay, so he's got the Vatican Library on track to become one of the largest libraries in the world. Okay, so this is a picture of one of the halls in the library today. Okay, it is a beautiful and impressive place. It's honestly kind of difficult to appreciate. There's just so much, and you're like, feel like you've been walking for 4 or 5 days. It's pretty amazing. There's a ton of artwork, a ton of historical objects. It's a museum, but also ancient texts and things from documents from history and books and things as well. So you think of a library, most of it looks like this. It's mostly a museum. Okay, in 1456, judges and commissioners of the Archbishop's Palace in the city of Rennes declare that Joan of Arc was innocent. And after almost a year of hearings, the Archbishop declares her original trial null. Okay. The most interesting part of this to me is the fact that her mother was still living. Okay, Joan's mother was there and to hear the final verdict announced, and was at a banquet in the city of Orleans, which celebrated Joan's rehabilitation. I thought that's really cool. I did not realize her mom was still alive. That's neat. In 1456, the Ottoman Turks overrun Athens. Okay, they turned the Parthenon, which is this Greek temple up on the hill, into a mosque. Unfortunately, they didn't do a very good job taking care of it. Okay, we always imagine like, oh, all these Greek ruins, they just sort of fell apart. No, during a war with the Venetians, they're using the Parthenon as a magazine for storing gunpowder, and it explodes. Parts of it have actually been rebuilt. It is more intact now than it was in the mid-1400s. If you can't get to Greece and still want to see a life-size copy, for some reason, there's one in Nashville, Tennessee. So you can go to Nashville and you can see a Parthenon. All right, I said the English weren't happy about the results of the 100 Years' War. So in 1461, they start a new war. All right, so in particular, Richard, Duke of York, was not pleased. at all the land that was lost on the continent in France. Okay, so these two families, both of whom are descended from King Edward III, have been at war for a number of years. One family is the House of York. One family is the House of Lancaster. Each family has a rose in their family crest, and this becomes known as the, you guessed it, War of the Roses, or English Civil War, but that's way less fun. Anyway, in 1461, Edward of the House of York defeats the Lancastrians at a battle called Mortimer's Cross, and he is proclaimed the king and ascends the throne as Edward IV. So the War of the Roses, which began almost as soon as the 100 Years' War ended, the War of the Roses ends. 1461, we have just one guy trying to be King of England for now. It will not last. In 1461, King Louis XI of France creates a postal service. Okay, this is neat. So during the Middle Ages, there was not like an organized postal delivery, where the state was handling all that. If you wanted a letter, you got a courier and you paid him. Okay. And from the 13th century, anybody that was organizing mail, postal services, were universities, and they kind of like had cornered that market. So in 1477, King Louis XI sets up a system of inns and messengers that will deliver his letters, and that's neat. So, okay, trying to make things clear here. Sometimes it's more difficult than others. This map that you're looking at is not from the correct time period. It's from the late 1800s, about the time we quit using your textbook, that era. Okay, it's got countries on it that don't exist in the 15th century. Right? So if there's so much wrong with it, why did I pick it? I chose this map so we can get our bearings. It's labeled with things that we can recognize, and it's easy to read. Okay, so in 1466, an Albanian named Gheorghe Castrioti, or Skanderberg, which is much easier, leads a successful resistance against an Ottoman invasion. Okay, and he is a hero across Christendom. In contrast, Serbia and Greece have been totally overrun by the Ottomans. Okay, parts of Romania, and they are moving into the area that would at this time would not be Austria-Hungary, it would be just plain Hungary. Okay, so why this map? Why is this important? Okay, we have bad guys seriously close, y'all. They're like standing on the patio. They're outside the sliding door. This is not good. We've held off Muslim invasions so many different times. Constantinople is gone, and look how close the Ottoman Turks are to the main part of Europe. Okay, and in 1468, Skanderberg dies, and the Ottomans also absorb Albania. Okay, so there's basically nothing between the Ottomans and the Holy Roman Empire except a little bit of the Balkans, a little bit of that area that's orange. In 1468, the other major Muslim empire in Egypt is the Mamluk Empire, is ruled by Al-Ashraf Quat and he's an interesting guy. So he stabilized the Mamluk state, consolidated the northern boundaries of his sultanate, which is where the his empire ends and the Ottoman Empire begins. He engages in trade with pretty much everybody, including the Europeans, and he's sort of like this patron of art and architecture. Okay, he fought wars his whole career, 16 separate military campaigns, but he's really better remembered for all these building projects that he sponsored in Mecca, Medina, Jerusalem, Damascus, Aleppo, Alexandria, basically the entire city of Cairo. Okay, he's also kind of infamous, right? He built a fortress on the remains of an ancient wonder, the Great Lighthouse of Alexandria, resulting in the final disappearance of any evidence of the lighthouse. So this is a fortress. Boo. That's okay. It's pretty cool. In 1469, Ferdinand of Aragon marries Isabella of Castile. In 1471, The Inca Empire in South America extends into Ecuador. Okay, so if you look, the darkest color is their original, and it expands to where now we're out at that lighter yellow color, almost the entire expansion of the Incan Empire. In 1477, we're going to try France again. Yay! Louis XI gains control of Burgundy. Okay? Is France confusing? Oui, yes. Very confusing, and do not worry. I do not expect you to remember all the maps and facts I'm presenting. It's hard for me to remember. So what do I want you to get? Okay, what is your takeaway? Okay, each of these areas is very complicated. Okay, heavily organized, centralized rule is not quite a thing. We're getting there. Okay, but each individual area, every little color on this map has its own, vibe that's determined by the local leader, for better or for worse, more than by the king. Like, can you even find Paris on this map? Where is it? How much influence does Paris have over Provence, right? Over Guyenne. Okay, this is changing slowly. The king is consolidating and strengthening his power over these places. But this is how it looks. This is how all of Europe looks. Okay, we have a mistaken picture of this as like this monolithic, all France is France. There are highways everywhere. It's like, no, that's not correct. All right, so what are the popes and bishops up to these days? Nothing good, usually. So in 1478, a conspiracy that includes the Archbishop of Pisa and has the secret support of Pope Sixtus IV leads to an attack on the powerful Medici family while they are praying in church. All right. The attack is unsuccessful. One of the Medici brothers is killed. The other survives. The conspirators are hanged. And because one of the conspirators was a archbishop and the Medici had him executed, Pope Sixtus puts Florence under an interdict, which is saying you're not allowed to have any sacraments, no celebration of the sacraments in your territory as a punishment. And he excommunicates Lorenzo de Medici. Okay. Then the Pope forms a military alliance with the King of Naples to attack Florence, but Lorenzo is able to diplomacy his way out of that one. There's not actually a physical war at this time. Okay, so this picture is the interior of the Medici family's palace in Florence. In 1479, the Ottoman Turks in Venice, who have been fighting for quite some time, reach a pause. Venice is basically defeated militarily, and they give up the parts of their empire along the Adriatic Sea that the Turks were occupying. A significant contributor to this defeat was the death of the Albanian general that I mentioned a little while ago. Without him also pushing back, the Venetians are basically the only ones fighting the Ottomans. Okay, so this is the Eastern Mediterranean, right? So this is where it says smaller states and all those little islands. That's Greece. Okay. By 1463, the Ottomans also control everything that's purple, everything that's green, everything that's white. Okay, all this other stuff that had been either controlled by, partially controlled by, or in alliance with the Venetians, it all reverts to the Ottoman Empire. In 1480, young Leonardo da Vinci invents the parachute. Apparently some guy in modern times he tried it. He jumped out of a hot air balloon at 3,000 feet, and it works. It actually works really well. It's much smoother than a modern parachute. The problem is Da Vinci's invention is not lightweight. It weighs almost 90 pounds. So if it falls on you as you land, it could hurt you. So that's not good. All right, in this very fuzzy map, the idea here is that you see all these green places. This is the Portuguese. Okay, they are founding trading settlements in green. Okay, literally all around the world. Look at how far they're going. Okay, I said age of exploration. That's what they're doing. I don't think you can see there are blue lines on this map. Those are paths, trade route paths that are continuously being utilized. All right. In 1483, Edward IV of England dies. His son, Edward V, succeeds him. Someone murders him. The original king's brother, the Duke of Gloucester, usurps the throne, is crowned Richard III. You need a whole bunch of charts that look like this in order to start making sense of these succession stories in English history. If you want the bare bones and the facts, it's very, very complicated. All right. If you don't want the bare bones and facts, if you'd rather have drama and personalities, you might prefer Shakespeare, all right, whose plays are not historically accurate, but are much more interesting. Okay, so all these people that we're reading about right now, these were the characters from Shakespeare's plays. Henry II, Henry III, sorry, Henry II, Henry IV, Henry V, Henry VI, Henry the bajillionth, okay, the Richards, all of these, okay. In 1492, Spain's monarchs, Ferdinand and Isabella, do their part in the war against Islam. They annex Granada. And by annex, we mean like conquer it and take over it. This completes the reconquest of Spain, which had begun almost 500 years earlier in the northernmost part of Spain with the establishment of Catholic Leon. This is a great map of the conquest. I was so excited. It shows all the layers, so that the oldest of the reconquest is at the top, and it goes down. Sorry I didn't find it before now, because this would have been great to look at as we were talking about the various reconquests over the last few hundred years. So, oops, now you know. And the voyage that the monarchy is paying for, led by Christopher Columbus, sets sail for China by going westward. Okay, people at the time thought he was pretty crazy. Not nearly as crazy as we know it was to think you could take just 30 days of supplies and make it to China from Spain. People had no idea how big the planet actually was. Okay, there were mathematicians. They'd made good calculations. There were a whole bunch of different ways, actually. People had estimated the size of the Earth, but they were considered theoretical and unuseful. Okay, there was no way the Earth was going to be that big. Oh, it was. Surprise, surprise. Okay, this is it. Last big thing for the century. This is a long, I know this is a long one. I'm sorry. There's a lot here. So in the 1480s, a Dominican priest had come to Florence and begun a campaign of preaching against the excesses of the Renaissance. His name is Savonarola, and he basically shows up, and the first thing he does is he's super rude to the Medici on purpose. Very politically brash. And the Medici just kind of ignore him. It's like, okay, here's a crazy preacher. We don't have particularly moral personal lives, so we're not going to get into it with him. Like, they didn't really have a leg to stand on it. They left him alone. Okay, so Savonarola continues to preach well into the 1480s, early 1490s, and he preaches against abuses in ecclesiastical life, okay, the immorality of the clergy, including and especially the members of the Roman Curia, which would be the Pope and the highest or the closest circles of church governance, what we would think of maybe like the Pope's court or something like that, and against the wickedness of princes and things like this. Okay, he sort of announces an approaching judgment of God. Okay, it's sort of like a prophet, but what he means, he means the King of France. Okay, and this is where the problems begin. Savonarola develops a relationship with Charles VIII, the King of France, who is invading Italy as we speak, and basically says, Charles is an agent of God. The destruction of the Medici is imminent. Aren't we, glad that this great French king is going to come clean house and
the line between church reform and political goals is blurred. Okay. But he's successful in some ways. He manages to get the Medici kicked out of Florence by a mob. The Medici go out they're in exile. And he forms like a brotherhood, kind of this, it's not a youth group, it's more than a youth group, but basically young people are encouraged to join this brotherhood and live a pious Christian life. And they turn into sort of a police force, this informal police force. They go around the city and will take dice and gambling cards away from people and lecture the people on their overly frivolous dress and things like this. So again, some of these principles are good. Florence was a very decadent, very morally problematic place, but the corrections are way too extreme. Okay. And again, he continuously seeks or praises the intervention of Charles VIII, not only into political things, but also into the reform of the church itself. Okay, to the point where Charles VIII threatens the Pope. Says, "Hey, I'm going to call a reform council and fix up your church," which is obviously which is a problem. Okay. Because Savonarola is a close supporter of the king. Eventually, the Pope commands Savonarola to come to Rome and defend himself. Mainly about this prophecies stuff. Why are you claiming that the political enemy of the Pope is the judgment of God? And let's sort this stuff out. Savonarola refuses to go to Rome. So the Pope writes him and says, okay, you may not preach in public. You must stop preaching in public until a commission from Rome can come to Florence and, vindicate you and examine your conduct and discuss whether or not what you're doing is actually acceptable. Okay. And he ignores the Pope. So it's not been great. This is where things really start to go wrong. He continues his violent preaching against the Pope and the immoral behaviors of the church hierarchy. And he continues to entangle the political power of Charles of France with his calls for church reform. Okay, basically, if the church doesn't shape up, the King of France needs to come in and handle it. Eventually, the Pope sends somebody to arrest Savonarola, but it's too late. At this point, the people of Florence, who like becoming a mob from time to time, lose patience with the conflict that Savonarola had created between their city and Rome. And they put him in prison, and he is eventually tortured and executed. So, last thing, we're almost done. Be careful with Savonarola. He is often described as a forerunner to Luther, as a reformer of the church. No, incorrect. He was always solid in his theology. He wrote many, many beautiful essays and books on the faith. His crime, right? His problem was disobedience. He could have gone to Rome. Okay? He could have stopped publicly preaching and still continued his message after, right? And he didn't. He refused to obey. And that's that. So, we went really quickly, we skipped things, and we still took forever. These centuries are big and complicated. Thank you for watching. Don't forget the next slide with the sources, and I will see you in the 1500s.